Welcome once again, everybody, to another episode of What You Believe. I'm Devin Croner, your favorite pastor, hopefully, and your host for this series. I'm excited to share with you an incredible interview with an individual this is just an incredible experience. I'm going to let him introduce himself and talk more about it, but I think you're really going to enjoy this. I think it's going to be informative. I think it's going to be fun, and I hope your curiosity is piqued. So he's getting signed in here. The audio is connected. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Well, welcome, Steve. I want you to go ahead, if you would. First of all, thank you for taking the time for joining us. Take a moment and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are as we get started.
Sure. My name's Steve McGowan. For the last 5 or so years, I've been working as a contractor in various roles with the United States Antarctic Program. So what that entails, in a nutshell, is about I spent half the year or so deployed to a research station in Antarctica, assisting and supporting scientists as they conduct research on everything from marine biology to astronomy and physics. So yeah, that's kind of why I'm here.
You said for the last 5 years. So what did you do before that? Where are you from? What is your background?
Sure. I'm a Chicago native. Prior to working in the program, I was working in sort of the legal field on the business side. It was a 9-to-5 office job downtown. And I got into the program sort of randomly, I suppose. I'd read an article about a gal who'd gone to Antarctica and come back, and they were asking her some questions about her time there, and it kind of piqued my curiosity. So I started reading up on it and applied, and a little while later I got a call, and then I quit my job and went.
Wow, that's amazing. So what would compel you to want to go to Antarctica?
I think at the time it was just sort of, the adventure component of it. It was an exciting idea, go to somewhere that very few people have been to see. And, I think I was looking for a break from my job and just, kind of that sense of it. I went down thinking that I was going to go just the once, kind of check that box and then, come back to the States, figure out what was next. And, here I am. I'm still with the circus, I suppose. So yeah, it was, for me, it was that sense of adventure at first. What keeps me coming back, though, I think is, it's a beautiful place, and it's, I continue to be kind of astonished by the landscape and the scenery and that aspect of it. But I really found kind of a really interesting tribe of people down there that I grew to love quite quickly. And so that's kind of my extended family now, is those folks that are there.
Very cool.
So that's what keeps coming back.
Tell us a little bit, what is Antarctica like? I mean, again, I imagine glaciers and penguins.
Sure. So, I think when you read about Antarctica, like on a Wikipedia page or something like that, or you see something on Nat Geo, people tend to describe Antarctica with a lot of superlatives, right? Like it's the coldest, driest, windiest, most isolated, that kind of thing. And all those are true. I have a bit of a different take on it, just because where I am is the most populated place on the continent, at least in terms of, how many people are there to conduct research. So I live in a town of, in the summertime, we're about 1,000 or so people.
Wow.
It very much resembles it's kind of a mining town and a liberal arts college, I think, is the way that a lot of people describe it. There's a lot of scientists there. But, it's an outpost in the middle of nowhere, right? So, the buildings are, they're pretty austere. They're very purpose built. It's not a lot of luxury down there. But yeah, it's, that's kind of what it is. To me, Antarctica is this weird little microcosm where, you have all kinds of people from all walks of life. Because you have scientists there, right? But you also have to have this cottage industry of, electricians to keep the lights on and cooks to cook the food, and someone's got to deal with the trash, and all these different folks come together, and it's really kind of an interesting melting pot of people from all over the United States and the world, different social backgrounds, different different political and religious belief sets. It's kind of fun to watch it all come together.
Wow. So you said it's a town. I wasn't aware that there were actually towns in Antarctica.
So I'm using the word town a little bit colloquially. Um, there's no permanent like town there. Nobody really lives in Antarctica.
Okay.
We all deploy for some amount of time, anywhere from a couple of weeks to a year or more. But everybody goes home at the end. I don't have a mailing address. I don't have like a permanent address in Antarctica. Um, but yeah, we are large enough that we have a lot of the trappings of a town. We have you know a coffee house where people get together. There's a post office. We have a little general store. So in a lot of ways, it does feel like living in a small town.
Hmm. No Walmarts.
Not yet. I'm sure they'd be there if they had the opportunity.
So how do you get to Antarctica? Like I remember flying to Sydney, Australia when
Yeah,
I was a teenager, and that was about the longest experience of my life. So how do you get there?
sure. So speaking for folks in the U.S. program,
Mhm.
right? We take commercial flights from wherever we live to Christchurch, New Zealand. And that's kind of our launch point. So you spend a couple of days in Christchurch getting outfitted, uh, you know, basically gearing up to go. And
Mhm.
then from there, the US Air Force or the New York Air National Guard will fly us down from Christchurch to McMurdo. And then for those folks who are heading onto the South Pole, they catch another flight from McMurdo to the pole. So the flight out of Christchurch to McMurdo is roughly 5 hours on a C-17. Um, Sometimes you get there and sometimes you don't. The tricky thing about that flight is weather in McMurdo being a little bit unpredictable. You can be 5 hours into your flight circling over the runway and they tell you that the weather's changed, they're going to turn around and go back. And all of a sudden you're on a 10-hour flight back to Christchurch having traveled no distance.
Wow. So the weather can change that quickly?
We've got really good weather people down there, and they're most of the time they're able to call that shot. But yeah, sometimes ground fog moves in and you can't see the runway. Sometimes just a storm blows in that we thought was going to move in a different direction.
Mhm.
Um, the runway that we're landing on, it's not tarmac like you're thinking at an airport.
Mm.
Um, it's actually compressed snow that's sitting on a floating glacier. So we basically, if you can imagine, like we run, super heavy weights over the snow and it compresses down and it ends up being harder than concrete.
Wow.
But
But if
yeah,
you
it's
shoot that, you're getting eaten by killer whales.
yeah, I suppose so. Um, Now we've seen a few orcas there. I don't think they're looking at us as food any more than we're looking at them as food. But,
So
but
once you're there, well, I guess step back. So when you're in Christchurch, how do you prepare? Like you talked about getting outfitted. Again, I
yeah,
know there are no Eskimos in Antarctica, but that's kind of what I'm picturing mentally. What is that like?
so there's a whole list of stuff that the national program provides for us, right? So you've probably seen people walking around with those like big heavy Canada Goose parkas. We get a version of that as well. Then you get the ski goggles and the neck gaiter and the wind pants and these like super insulated boots to wear on the ice. Um, so we're going in essentially just it's a warehouse where you size all that up and make sure that everything's going to fit right and
Mhm.
figure out what you need. A lot of the stuff we bring ourselves. So like I'm bringing my long johns and wool socks and things like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, so it's basically a day to get geared up. You're also kind of catching up to the time change. It's a 16-hour difference from at least from central time to New Zealand.
Mhm.
So takes a little bit to get the wear off the jet lag, that kind of thing.
Right. So once you get there and there are different things going on. Again, I love the way you describe it as a liberal arts / mining town. That's fantastic. So there's lots of different things going on. Can you tell us about some of the programs? You're part of the U.S. Antarctic program, correct?
Right.
And so
So
within that is going on.
yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that happens down there. Basically, the process is, grantees come down and they're awarded these grants by the National Science Foundation. So, they submit their proposals and they want to study whatever they want to study, and it gets
Mhm.
funded. Um, they are down there, and I have never gone down as a grantee. I should clarify. I'm part of the support staff that essentially operates the station so that they can do their work. But yeah, so you show up and you're kind of, when you get there, it's sort of like getting into a play in the second act, right? Like it's just everything's happening sort of continuously. Um, so you've got scientists who are, let's say they are studying, the seal populations that are down there, right?
Mhm.
So every day they're hopping on snowmobiles, they're heading out to where these seals are pupping or where they're coming out of the ice to rest. Um, you know, they might be tagging those seals so that they can track them over time. Last year we had a group that was using a drone that was 3D imaging them, so that they could assess growth, weight changes without having to actually get hands-on with the animal and disturb it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then you've got sort of the physics astronomy folks that are going down to the South Pole because it is, again, one of the driest places on Earth. So if you're trying to look, super far out into the atmosphere, there's nothing interfering with that. It's also dark for 6 months of the year, which is pretty helpful when you're trying to look at the stars.
Hmm.
Um, some folks are doing seismology work. There's an active volcano that's about 25 miles away from the station, so they'll maybe take helicopters part of the way or all the way up to that and to place instrumentation there.
Hold on. There's an active volcano in the middle of Antarctica.
Well, so it's Mount Erebus. It is the world's southernmost active volcano, and it's pretty close to the edge. So I'm like, McMurdo, think of it as like a coastal facility. So yeah, Mount Erebus is basically a simmering pot, right? So it's constantly venting, and it might throw a little bit of stuff up, but it's not going to like erupt, the way that you think of. It's never going to be like a Pompeii or a Mount St.
Oh,
Helens.
you say.
Yeah, we both hope. But
So what is that like? I'm sorry, I'm stuck on this now. What is that like in the coldest place in the world with a volcano? I mean, does that affect? Do you get temperature changes? Do you get earthquakes? Is it?
no, there's not any seismic activity that I've seen, or at least, like you're never going to see like a cup rattle or anything like that. There might be little tremors that are, not detectable by us, but instruments pick them up. Yeah, it doesn't really change my day to day. Other than, in addition to everything else I have to look at, there's this volcano that, sometimes it's smoking up a little bit, and it's just something else to check out.
And the other thing you said is that it's dark about 6 months of the year. Now, when you
Right.
say dark, are we talking midnight dark? Are we talking dusk? Like what?
Yeah. So basically, think about it like this: if you're at the equator, right, you get 12 hours a day and 12 hours of night every day for the entire year round. And the closer you get to either pole, the more that changes.
Right.
So where McMurdo sits, the sun goes down for the first time in late February, and it only sets for like a minute and a half or so, and then it pops back up over the horizon. But every day from there on out, like the days get shorter and the days get faster, depending on what time the season is, at a greater rate, much greater rate than we're used to here in the States.
Hmm.
So, the sun goes down for the first time in February, and it goes down for the last time in like April or May. And at that point, you still might get some residual light because the sun is approaching the horizon. So you get that kind of like pre-dawn light. Um, but yeah, you do get, I mean, it ends up being about, I don't know, 3.5 or 4 months where you step outside at, 12 noon and it is pitch black out. I mean, like,
Wow.
every star in the sky above you, that kind of thing.
Okay, so several questions within this context. First of all, what is that like to see a sunset and a sunrise within a couple of minutes?
It's bizarre. And it definitely is one of the things that I think I maybe take for granted now because I go down there and I know what I'm getting into, having done it a few times. But the first year that I went, I remember, I got down there and it was pretty much constant daylight. So in the summertime, it's 24 hours a day for months on end, and that gets a little bit. They talk about like Vegas where there's no windows and the lights are always bright and it tricks you into staying awake longer. It kind of has the same effect. You really have to force yourself to a schedule. Make sure that you're asleep by such and such time because your body just wants to keep going.
Right.
And then, after months of that, to finally see the sunset is a really, really special thing. It's.
But then
You
what is
feel,
it like when it doesn't come back up the next day? Because that would freak me out.
That transition is pretty rewarding though, because if you've been down there for the full summer, right, and it's been daylight this whole time, I mean, that's fine and all. And we have there's mountains in the background, and it's great to look at, but you really do start to miss stars. So when it does finally get dark, it is really like I've never felt a sense of accomplishment just for seeing nighttime until I got there. It's pretty rewarding, I think.
Hmm.
Um,
So with that level of blackness, but again, you said it's very dry, so you can see the stars. Now, first of all, it's completely
sure.
different stars than what we see in the northern hemisphere.
Correct.
But I mean, how bright is that? Because I mean, again, I grew up in central Illinois, farmland, but there still are lights and farm lights and things like that. So out
Sure.
there's none of that. What's that like?
Yeah. So I mean, it's really kind of jarring. Like I grew up in Chicago, so I'm not used to seeing a whole lot of stars in the night sky just from light pollution. McMurdo, you walk 10 minutes away from town, and it is pitch dark. You see everything. I mean, like you can spot every little satellite that's tracking across the sky. You can see, you can see different galaxies with like I just have a little entry level digital camera. We've got the southern lights because we are that far south. It's pretty. It's incredibly beautiful. It's really humbling, honestly.
Now you said you can actually see other galaxies?
Yeah, so we've got the large and small Magellanic Clouds, which are basically galaxies that are visible in the southern hemisphere. It's pretty cool.
That almost makes me want to jump on a plane and go just to see that. Wow. So now, again, you talked about seasons and you keep saying summer, but I mean, what is summer like in Antarctica?
Yeah, so, obviously southern hemisphere, so the seasons are flipped, right? Our summer is northern winter.
Mm-hmm.
So the summer from October to February, which is basically kind of when we're down there and it's the big rush of the scientific high season, if you will. It's still pretty cold. I mean, it'll get up to, there's some days where it might hit like 37, 38 degrees out. Those are pretty few and far between.
Nice and balmy.
Yeah, I mean, that's shorts weather really at that point. You know, the thing about the weather is like, and I think it's true anywhere, as long as the wind isn't up, it can be as cold as it wants to be and it's not that bad. But, if it's 5 degrees out and it's breezy, you're going to feel every one of those 5 degrees. Yeah, it's, we don't get a whole lot of storms in the summertime. It's pretty stable weather most of the time. It might get windy, but that's about it. Winter is really when it gets, that's when you get sort of the authentic Antarctic experience, if you will. So you get these storms that'll come in and they'll whip the snow up off the ground, and your visibility drops to maybe 20 feet at best. You've got 70-mile-an-hour winds that are pulling through, and at that point, we're not going outside anymore. Essentially, it's we'll all get the communication to stay in whatever building we're at until the storm dies down. So.
Now, when you talk about storms, I mean, does it snow and rain and sleet in Antarctica like it does anywhere else in winters and such?
So I'm far enough south that it really doesn't rain. It'll never, we don't get enough precipitation, and it typically doesn't get warm enough for that to happen. Um, and again, through most of the summer, it doesn't snow. Antarctica it's a high desert, so there is very little precipitation, annually. We do get a bunch in the wintertime, and snow will pile up. But yeah, summertime is a pretty, again, and it's what makes it so appealing for scientists to get down there, is that the weather's amenable enough that they can get out into the field and do whatever they need to do,
Hmm.
while Mother Nature plays along.
Wow. I've never ever once thought of Antarctica as being a high desert.
Hmm.
That is
Yeah, it's a
interesting.
weird thing to think about, because you think about it, it's covered in ice, it contains, a huge percentage of the Earth's fresh water, but very little snow actually falls there,
Hmm.
um, you know, enough that it's classified technically as a desert. Yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic. Now, have you seen uh, changes in the topography, the geography, the Antarctica over the 5 years that you've been going? I know, climate change is a very big topic in our world. As you're flying in and out, as you're there, can you see the effects of things like that over the past 5 years?
Um, I hesitate to say yes, just because I think that 5 years isn't a really, it's not a long enough span of time to make that observation with any kind of conclus. It's not a strong conclusion to draw.
Mhm.
Um, am I surprised by how quickly the snow melts? Yes. Um, you know, I tend to believe the scientists that I've met that go down there to study climate science.
Mhm.
Um, I take them at their word, because that's their profession, and you know, that's
Sure.
what they do. But
I just think you listen to some of the documentaries or news reports. It's like all the glaciers will be melted next year is how they make it sound. So I didn't know if it was really that drastic in the way you see it going every year, or if okay, things are changing, but it still is kind of that we don't really perceive it day in day out kind of thing.
I will say this, that uh, I haven't seen enough personally to make that, uh, statement.
Mhm.
There's this painting. So at Palmer Station, which is where I first worked, there was this guy that came down from media. They sponsor artists, writers, a few folks to go down there every year, essentially to, um, you know, to work on whatever they're going to work on, which ultimately benefits the public, and it educates them, or helps them understand what that place is.
Mhm.
Um, this guy was a painter, and this was the probably early '80s that he came down, and he left to the station as a kind of a token of his appreciation for his time there, this painting of the station with this backdrop. Um, and I remember when I got there, I looked at that and I was a little confused by it, because it didn't really look much like what I saw if I looked out the window.
Mhm.
And it's because the glacier had receded, in the intervening 20 years, enough that there was a new island that got uncovered. So it's not just a little, yeah. These glaciers are changing pretty rapidly.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm. And that's something that I want to point out. And again, I know you're not on the science side of it down there,
sure.
but there is land under all that ice, and we're
Yeah.
finding out more than some scientists thought there was, from what I've been reading more recently. What is that like? I mean, have you seen it?
uh, so yeah, so I mean, like, we're on land. Um, when the snow melts, I'm standing on rock. Uh, it
Not a
is,
volcano.
yeah, where we're at, it's a lot of volcanic gravel. So it
Okay.
gets real dusty, and again, that's sort of why I say it's like a mining town, because it really is, kind of.
What kinds of animals are in Antarctica? Other than I know there's seals and penguins, but
Yep.
there's more, right?
Yeah, so you've got seals, penguins, you've got orcas, you've got a couple of species of whale that go down there that migrate in. Um, there's, I think there's only one species of like a land animal. So penguins obviously are aquatic as well. but it's Belgica antarctica, which is this little midge, like a little flightless, wingless fly. Um, they live down there. There's a lot of bird life down there, so we've got snow petrels and skuas and sheathbills, and there's a pretty wide avian biodiversity there.
Do most of them migrate in and out based on the seasons, or are most of them there all the time?
Yeah, they're mostly migrant. I think they're all actually completely migratory birds. I don't think there's anything that stays down there the entire time, with the exception, obviously, of the penguins.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, some of these birds. I mean, I think there's a few that are actually like they'll make it up into the northern hemisphere. They fly a pretty incredible distance every year.
Wow. What kind of plant life, if any, exists in Antarctica?
Um, so only on the western Antarctic Peninsula, which is, if you're looking at a map, it's the little bit that snakes up towards Chile and Argentina. Um, that's really the only spot where it gets far enough north that anything can actually grow. And even there, it's pretty sparse.
Mhm.
So you get some moss, lichen, things like that. Um, some very a little bit of like maybe crabgrass kind of stuff.
Salad food.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. I don't know if you've eaten many moss salads recently, but
I prefer not to talk about it. so, so in your function with the U.S. Antarctic Program, and I want to talk about the program,
Mhm.
but in your function, what is it you're doing, um,
Yeah,
and what I guess how do you do it?
sure. When I first went down there, I applied to just about any job that I thought I could reasonably do, and maybe 20 or 30 more that I knew I couldn't. Um, it was the shotgun approach of I'm going to try a whole lot of things. I'm going to see who calls me back. And so my first gig down there, I went as a janitor. I was cleaning bathrooms and scrubbing toilets and things like that. Not very glorious work, but I kind of looked at it as this is my ticket to be there,
Right.
and all the time after work that I get to myself to walk around and see this place and have this experience is
Mhm.
that's supplemental to my pay.
Right.
Um,
So talk about that part of it. Is it a 9 to 5 job, or is it shift work? I mean, how does that part of it work?
it kind of varies by what job you have for that particular gig, and for a lot of folks, kind of your regular business hours are Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to or 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. So we work about 54 hours a week, um, and that's part of the contract that we all sign on to.
Mhm.
Sundays are typically off. You get a few folks that work different shifts, so they cover the Sundays. Um, and then, other departments, do you need to be on call or do you have different requirements? Most recently I was working as a cargo handler, so I was loading and unloading those C-17s that we flew down on, and other aircraft were supporting those missions as well.
And how do you do that without losing fingers?
Carefully and with a lot of communication. Um, I've there's a huge amount of experiential knowledge from the folks that have been coming down there for a while.
Mhm.
Um, the one thing I found uh, in working there is that everybody is pretty quick to train up the new folks. Um, you know, it's such a small community, and you are so reliant on the people that you work with because there isn't somebody to replace you if you go down, right? Like
Mhm.
they can't just hire somebody and have them be there the next day.
Mhm.
So, there's a huge amount of investment that goes into making sure that everybody's able to do their job well and they're able to continue doing their job well. So the safety culture down there is something that, at least in the departments I've worked in, we take it very seriously.
Mhm.
Um, we want to make sure that everybody has a great experience down there. It's the worst thing to find out that, somebody's trip to Antarctica and this great experience they're having is getting cut short because they weren't looking where they were walking and they just, sprained an ankle or something.
Oh wow. Now, what about the off time? I mean, what do you do in your time off? I can't imagine, like in Chicago, you can go to a park, you can go to a bar, you can go to a Bulls
Yeah.
game. What do you do that doesn't involve freezing to death in Antarctica?
Well, so some of it does involve freezing a little bit. There are a bunch of hiking trails around, so there's a lot of opportunity to get out and sort of get away from town and really be in that nature that's so incredible to see.
Mhm.
So a lot of folks spend their time going on hikes or cross country skiing or snowshoeing or what have you. Um, you know, less for the folks that don't want to do that, or maybe you're just not feeling up to it that day. Like I said, we've got a coffee house where you can go and sit down and play a board game with your friends, or just kind of relax, have a glass of wine, what have you. There's a lot of
Like in a
folks
coffee
who,
house if they serve wine.
yeah. um, a lot of folks are into pool and darts and things like that, so they'll get up to that. I don't know if you've ever played cribbage, but there's a pretty ferocious cribbage community down there. There are some card sharks to be had.
Okay.
Uh, Other than that, we've got a weight gym, an aerobics gym. There's a basketball gym, so people will play basketball or soccer or volleyball, things like that. Um, we trying to think what else. There's a lot of people that go down there that play instruments. So a lot of folks get bands together and they'll put on a little show, or they'll have an open mic night a couple of times a month, that kind of thing. Um,
I'm imagining moving my life for 6 months to Antarctica, and instead of packing socks and blankets, I pack my guitar.
yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
first year that I went down there, I played in a band with this guy who he was with the Air National Guard. He was brought in uh, essentially to help support their mission of flying us around the continent. And he'd been trying and trying for years to get this assignment. Like, he actually extended his contract with the Guard just to keep himself eligible to go. Uh, and when he came down, we have this weight limit of you can only take like 80 pounds or so of stuff with you.
Wow.
And his was like a pedal kit and his guitar, and like he was ready to go. So yeah, there's definitely people who plan around that. We have some pretty decent instruments down there, although the cold is not very kind to guitars over time. So we do our best to keep them in good shape, and it's all we can really hope for. Um, there's quite a bit going on down there. The other thing too is that we've got this group of people who they travel all over the world. Um, so those folks usually have, like, we'll see maybe once a week or so, somebody will give a little lecture about that time I went to South America, or that summer I spent riding freight trains around the US, or this is what it was like setting up Ebola hospitals last year, that kind of thing.
Wow.
We also have a couple of science lectures every week from the community down there. And that's really, really kind of cool, because in a lot of ways, if you don't have a job that works directly with those scientists, like when I was a janitor, you know, uh, it was a really good way to remind me that the work I was doing was still connected. It still mattered.
Mhm.
Um, and that was really special. And I learned a whole lot about stuff that I otherwise maybe never would have thought about.
Wow. Now, what about things like news? Is there TV down there? Can you get signal, internet?
So we've got the Armed Forces Network, which is like the same broadcast you'd get if you were living in an army base overseas
Okay.
anywhere else. Our internet is there, but only barely. Think about like 1995, like 56K internet.
Okay.
That's about what we have,
Hmm.
and it's kind of lovely. Like, to not be bombarded with news constantly. It's really, really pleasant, actually.
Especially the time that we're living in right now, I imagine that might be really nice.
Yeah. So it's certainly there, and you can seek it out if you want to stay up to date on information. But um, kind of one of the things I love is, like, once you get there, your cell phone doesn't work, and the internet's way too slow to load Facebook, and so you're not constantly seeing like everyone's opinion on everything. And it really, really is just like, you figure out that all of that noise is not necessarily beneficial to a person.
It
Um,
is incredibly refreshing. It really does. So let's talk about the U.S. Antarctic program a little bit now,
Please.
and what is it? Who are they working with, and why? Because again, the nobody owns Antarctica per
Right.
se, it's not a sovereign nation, but there is a definite interest in preserving the animals, preserving the landscape as best as possible, but also
Sure.
conducting research. So tell
Sure.
us.
So I guess, to kind of explain the American program, it's necessary to talk about, kind of what governance there is in Antarctica.
Mhm.
So there's a UN treaty that was signed in the 1950s, and it essentially sets up Antarctica as um, you know, a land that shall be claimed by no country, that shall be preserved for scientific exploration. So what that means for us is, we can't we can't mine for minerals down there. We can't drill for oil. Um, we can't have a military presence down there. And I'm going to say that very specifically because we do have, like I said, the Air National Guard flies us there, and they're there in a logistics capacity. But
Mhm.
they can't set up like an Air Force base there. You're never going to see like an F-15 take off from Antarctica.
Hmm.
Um, and all the nations that sign on to this agree to abide by these terms, and they also agree to be inspected by any other country. So, you know, if Italy decides that they want to inspect our station and make sure that we're keeping our end of the deal, they're more than welcome to. They can do that. And by the same token, we can go to any other member nation and say, hey, we'd like to send an inspector to your station just to make sure everything's on the up and up. It's by and large, it's a really interesting place because you see these countries that, like, everywhere else you read about them, they're perhaps adversarial.
Mhm.
Um, and in Antarctica, these countries are cooperating quite beautifully.
Hmm.
So, like, we think of Russia and China, or at least they've popped up in the news sort of as these adversarial nations to the United
Mhm.
States. Um, but in Antarctica, it's sort of a different ball game. It's sort of, that's over there and we're here and we have this common objective. So, the research that we produce is open to be shared with those countries and vice versa. Um, you know, we uh, we use our research station just because it's kind of a travel hub in the continent to get the South Koreans and the Italians to their stations. We have a pretty close relationship with the Kiwis. Obviously, we come through Christchurch to get to our station. Our two countries work pretty well together.
Mhm.
It's kind of fun to imagine how that might look if the rest of the world took its used us as a model. But to get back to the emphasis of the program, the National Science Foundation created the U.S. Antarctic Program, and starting in the 1950s, the U.S. Navy came down and started building. Navy Seabee started building these stations. Um, they've kind of grown over time to fit the needs and evolving technology and science that we're able to do there. Um, yeah, it's a pretty thriving operation today. I mean, we have, like I said, there's about 1,000 people moving in and around McMurdo at any given time.
Hmm.
Uh, we've got, field camps that we support by helicopter, by small aircraft. Um, the South Pole being a very important resource for physicists everywhere. It's kind of an important location for everyone. Um, yeah, there's a whole lot going on. Um, just recently, we started a joint operation with the British Antarctic Program. It's a joint research field camp on the Thwaites Glacier. And the Thwaites Glacier is one of these that we were talking about earlier that's rapidly changing. So they're trying to study that
Mhm.
while the change is happening to figure out how and why and what might we learn from that.
Right.
So yeah, it's a pretty big and pretty cool operation.
So now you described it as a camp with these other outposts
Yep,
for U.S. operations, but
sure.
other countries have their own camps. Is that correct?
So yeah, McMurdo is certainly the largest by far, but we're not the only ones there. I mean, we have, the Russians and Chinese are there, the English are there, uh, you know, Italy, Germany, France all have stations there. South Korea,
Mhm.
you know, South American nations have a presence there as well. There's quite a lot, and even though we are not, very close to most of them, you know, there's something of a spirit of camaraderie amongst us. You
Mhm.
know, we don't typically hear too much about the other programs just because, again, they are very remote.
Mhm.
Um, but we know that they're there.
Hmm.
Most of the, I would say that the majority of research stations on the continent are summer only. So these are camps that basically pack up and prepare board up the windows, that kind of thing, for the winter season, and they show back up once the season's over to pick back up where they left off.
Hmm.
Um, most of our field camps are that way as well. The only three stations that we operate year round are McMurdo, the South Pole, and then Palmer Station, which is on that peninsula, the Western Antarctic Peninsula.
Mhm. Mhm.
Everything else, yeah, it's essentially, we open up shop and then we close it in February.
Wow. Now, when you are there,
Mhm.
do you have the opportunity, in your capacity with what you're doing, do you have the opportunity to ever go out in the field to observe or just be a part of that or to help in any way? Or is it more like if you're going to go out, it's because you're on a trail or doing something solo?
Sure. So the majority of my time is spent in or around McMurdo. Um, my specific job doesn't have much cause for me to go to the South Pole or to go to these field camps. Um, Occasionally, we will send folks there. We have these like morale trips. We call them boondoggles, and it's basically, we look at the folks who, like the janitors or the dishwashers, the cooks, the people who don't get an opportunity to get out of town much.
Mhm.
Um, we try at least once during their deployment to get them on, maybe you're going to take a short trip to some little remote location in Antarctica to check on like a fuel cache, or maybe we're going to send you out under the sea ice to flag a trail or something like that. It's an opportunity for those folks just to get out of town and kind of see something unusual.
Mhm.
Uh, so I've been on a few of those, but yeah, most of my time honestly is spent at McMurdo at the station. The thing of it is like in town, it's pretty safe. Um, you know, if you get out of town, there are crevasses. There are some pretty real natural dangers out there.
Mhm.
Um, so we are limited pretty severely by how far out we can go before it's at this point, take another 10 meters off this line and who knows what might happen.
Right. Well, and again, you mentioned your cell phone doesn't work, so it's not like you can just call for help.
Right. Yeah.
Have you personally had the chance to go to the South Pole Station at any point?
I haven't gone to the pole yet. Maybe I'll get there one of these days. Um, yeah, it's from what I understand of my friends, at McMurdo, we're on the coast. We've got these mountains to look at. Sometimes the ice breaks out, and we're right on the waterfront at that point, and there's a lot of marine life we can look at. It's kind of cool. The South Pole is basically flat and white for 360 degrees around you. Um, and much credit to my friends who've been there, and my colleagues who enjoy that. I don't know if I could do it. To be honest with you, maybe I'll prove myself wrong someday though.
It sounds like growing up either on the beach or in Colorado, and then you go to Central Illinois and it's nothing but corn and soy.
Yeah, right,
So you're back now, correct?
correct,
Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking because the internet wouldn't work.
right.
Are you're continuing or planning to continue to go back? Is that correct?
Yeah, I will most likely be heading back in February for at least another 7 or 8 months.
Mm-hmm. Do
Um,
you know yet what you'll be doing? Does it change, or are you kind of locked in at this point to a certain gig?
no, so I'll be going back as essentially like station administration. So we have to prepare a lot of reports just to keep the NSF abreast of what's happening, kind of day to day.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of it is just sort of figuring out, if you've got a question that you need an answer to, I'm the guy that I don't know the answer, but I know who does, and I'll kind of get you there.
Okay.
So it's part office manager, it's part reference librarian.
What do you do when you're back? Do you have another job, or how does that work?
I try not to. Um,
Well, I
you
can
know,
imagine that would be very difficult if you're like, hey, I really want this job. I'm only going to be here for a few months and then I'm going to leave.
sure. Uh, yeah, it's funny. Like I find that I get a lot of interviews very easily just because I think if for no other reason than like they've got to interview like 10 candidates that day, and I'm the guy who went to Antarctica, and it's just like even if this guy doesn't have a shot at the job, let's just bring him in to talk to him for a little bit. But yeah, most of the time, and this year's obviously everybody's plans went sideways with COVID, but most of the time, I try to travel quite a bit. Um, so I'm getting used to being in one place, which is really weird for me in the States of late. But yeah, most of the time, I try to, I'll go visit. I've got family in Europe that I'll go see, or I'll try to just, go somewhere I haven't been before and explore that new place. Part of the beautiful thing about, having taken this job, I'd never left the United States before I went to Antarctica. Um, and now, just getting out there and doing it opened my eyes to the possibilities of doing so much more of it. So I'm, my mission right now is to sort of fill up my passport with as many stamps as I can.
Okay. Well, and really, I mean, there's got to be some thought process of if I can go and survive in Antarctica, that's nothing. Anywhere else is nothing. I mean,
Sure. It's, yeah, I mean, your sense of adventure really, you get a shot in the arm. Plus, like I said, I mean, you know, when I'm at work, we've got people that come from all over the United States. So it's, domestic travel is great because I got friends in like 47 of the 50 states that, if I call them up, I at least have a couch to crash on for the night.
that's worth it
And
right there.
yeah, so yeah, it does make travel a whole lot easier, and also just talking to those people, you get to hear about their experiences about,
Mhm.
oh, that time I, got confused for somebody else at the airport and got arrested in Kenya, or you know, one of my friends gave this travel lecture on, it was titled "Hitchhiking Through Yemen, Somalia, and Djibouti and Why That's a Bad Idea." Um, but it was just like, who would even think to do these things until you hear about somebody that did, and then it becomes something maybe you think about.
Yeah, I didn't even know you could get into Yemen, quite honestly. So there's that.
Yeah,
And maybe that was part of the lecture. So
right.
then what, I just completely lost my train of thought. The Antarctic program. So you heard about something else and this piqued your curiosity. You found this program. So
Sure.
like there are opportunities for other people, or like are they hiring? Can I go to Antarctica?
Yeah, so we're a contractor community, right? So like I said, the scientists, you kind of need to be in that field and work with somebody, typically a professor at a university.
Fair enough.
Uh, but we always need cooks. We always need, carpenters and plumbers and electricians, and like there's a huge cottage industry of folks that are down there. So yeah, I wish I'd wish I'd prepared for this earlier. I would have come up with the link. But basically, if you go to usep.gov, there's a jobs page. It'll link you to, there's half a dozen or so different contractors that
Mhm.
hire for all the positions down there.
Mhm.
Um,
And you mentioned you just kind of applied for a bunch of stuff, but like, what are some qualifications that one needs to be able to get a job in Antarctica?
um, and it depends on the job, right? So obviously, they're not going to hire me with no electrical skills to be the electrician. Um, they're not going to
But
hire
that's,
like, and I'm glad that they wouldn't. Uh, but I think, outside of your typical stuff, having some kind of travel experience, or having done something like that, at least to be able to talk about like, hey, I've lived in remote situations, or
Mhm.
I'm used to travel for work. Um, that's really important to us because we do get folks down there, um, and you hate to see it happen, but people do get there and they realize it's a bad fit. Um, you know, I didn't realize that, being away from my wife was going to be this tough, or, you know,
I could see that being a problem for a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you get that, and it is tough, and it is a balancing act that you have to do if you're in that, if you're in that situation.
Hmm.
um you know and so we try to figure out, because we want it to work too, so we try to find people that are going to be, on top of being, good at their jobs, they're going to be good at Antarctica, if you will.
Hmm.
uh, and I think for the most part, people get down there and they adapt.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's not,
And I do want to clarify, this is not like the Peace Corps. They pay you for this, correct?
correct. Yeah, it is a job. Yep. Yeah, it's, nobody's going down there to get rich, but
It's a science-based job, so I can't imagine.
um, but if your primary concern is money, you're probably not interested in us to begin with. um, yeah, the adage is like, the first time you go to Antarctica, it's for the experience. The second time, it's for the money, just because it's a long contract job and you don't have expenses while you're there. And then the third time and beyond, you go because you don't want to do anything else anymore. Um,
Neat.
and I find that truer than I ever thought would be possible.
Hmm. All right. So before we go, I want you to give us maybe one of your favorite stories. But first, I have one question. Is
Yeah.
there ever a polar plunge by the people who are stationed in Antarctica?
It used to happen quite often, and the photos of it look unpleasant. uh,
Even on your balmy 37-degree days, I cannot imagine it.
Man, yeah, because that water's got to be, it's salt water, so it's colder than freezing.
Right.
Uh, yeah, I'm not a strong swimmer. Let's put it that way. Um, yeah, I guess, you know, it's hard to pick a favorite story. Um, it really is. I will say this. I think the biggest first impression from my first season, um, there was a lot of marine biology at Palmer Station. There still is. And most of that, or a good amount of it, happens, out on the water. So the scientists are getting in these small, the Zodiac, the little black inflatable boats.
Okay.
Um, and they're out there all day long as the weather's nice, to get as much research in while, while the sun is shining and it's nice. Um, for us, we'd occasionally get to take those boats out after, after we got done working. Um, and so one day we are out on the water, and there's a group that's studying humpback whales. And so we radio them and we find out where they're at, and we approach a little bit, and we're still kind of far enough away that we're not going to get in their way and we're not going to bug the animals at all. But we still get to watch a humpback whale, which is friggin' awesome.
Hmm.
Um, and while we're doing it, there's this small pod of orcas that we see off to the left, and we're kind of like curious about them. So we get a little bit closer, maybe a quarter mile out, and all of a sudden they turn and they start swimming towards us. And I remember my friend saying, "Oh, sweet, they're coming towards us." Oh, wait, guys, they're coming towards us. You know? And so we are well aware of the fact that, like, we are not the dominant species if this comes to a test. But they dove right under our boat and popped up the other side, maybe 7 or 8 feet away. And it's one of those moments where, like, you're so blown away by it. And then I just remember thinking afterwards, I'm like, that's something I did as part of my job. Like, that makes up for all the bad days I will ever have, you
Yeah.
know.
And I'd clean toilets all day long if I got to go. Just the idea of being able to see orcas in their environment like that.
Yeah.
Uh, Man, makes me. I got 4 kids, but it makes me want to sign up and go to Antarctica for 6 months. Also because I have 4 kids.
Fair enough.
That is really, really awesome, and I so appreciate you sharing. And I want to ask, because this program is kind of called What You Believe. So
Sure.
what, if you could give us a summary, what do you believe about the importance of this job and why people need to understand uh, Antarctica and what's going on down
Sure. You know, I think it's kind of twofold for me. The first is that, there is this massive amount of knowledge that we're uncovering day by day about climate science and climate change.
Mhm.
And that is something that, whether or not you feel it in your day-to-day life, it is starting to impact us, as a society, as a species, however you want to frame that. And so, you know, I think that, for the benefit of ours and particularly for future generations, it's really important to get a handle on that now, um, so that we could be better informed about how to proceed. The second thing is, like, for all the research, that I don't know about, or that I'm not as informed about, or that maybe doesn't touch my life, right? Like, as much as I love looking at seals, I don't know. I can't draw a great straight line from, knowledge about seals to benefiting Steve McGowan. Um, but I think the counter argument to that is that, so much of what we've learned and what benefits us today happened by accident. We were studying one thing and we learned something else.
Mhm.
Um, and so, you know, frame it however you like. Maybe say that, just the pursuit of knowledge is a beautiful thing, or that, the benefits that we'll reap, we can't predict. But either way, I think it's very important to continue learning, to continue pushing into the extremes of what we don't know,
Mhm.
and trying to just learn a little bit more, understand our place in the universe just that much better. So that to me is very important, and I think that, the Antarctic program and really all the national programs that are there are operating towards that same common goal, and I appreciate them all for it.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. I've enjoyed it, and I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with us so much.
Yeah, Devin, it was great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody watching, thank you for joining. Hopefully, your interest is piqued. Again, you can go online and check out more about the Antarctic program. If you want to go work in Antarctica, you can apply. They have a need, especially if you're a skilled laborer, and maybe you get to see some orcas up close and personal as well. But thanks for joining. And again, Steve, thank you. And we'll see y'all again real soon. Bye.
Take care, Devin.